Welcome to the Deep Chat.
All right, Kyle, another hot take for today. Is code and or art generated from AI ML unethical?
Oh, a strong no from me on this one. Maybe in certain very niche cases, but the idea we'd want to get rid of these tools because they're unethical, I don't see that at all.
I agree, no, but we do have to unpack a couple of things
Sure.
here because I think there's some edge cases that are pretty interesting and hard to swallow. I'll give you one example. When I write code, I mean, one could argue that all the code that I write is just from all the code that I've seen and or learned from, right? From day
Correct.
one. You know, my first line of code, hello world,
Yep.
is that derivative? If I write another hello world program and it happens to look the same, we all are the summation of the things we've learned.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, if I reproduce, a complicated program, 50 lines, and it happens to have the same signature or the same exact details of some open source code, now is that a problem? Because if I did it, I know that I didn't look at the open source code, but it happens to be the same because some things can just be coded the same because it makes sense, right?
Right. I mean, binary search. It's no one has a trademark on it, nor should they. You can go implement it in any language you want, and my implementation will be very similar to a lot of other people's.
I think most of us would say, just being programmers is not a big deal. I get it. But if you have a machine, the chatbot that outputs some open source code that it might have been trained on, and it outputs it in such a way that it's identical to the open source code, even though there's no compelling reason to change that code, there's no real other way to do it. Like there's only so many ways you can do certain functions. Let's say there's no real compelling reason to change it, but yet it reproduced a chunk of this open source code and it doesn't attribute the license to them. That's where it gets sticky, right? Because people are going to argue, well, it's a machine, so it just sucked it from there without a fundamental understanding of the fact that it's not sucking it from the open source. It's simply doing statistical modeling, right?
Well, you can go both ways on that. It could be that is an example of overfitting, in which the model literally memorized. It's fair to anthropomorphize this point. When machine learning overfits to certain examples, it literally memorizes them.
Okay.
Doesn't mean that's what happened here. As you pointed out, it's very reasonable that something could have spit out an obvious answer to a common question, and that just so happens to match a canonical implementation.
Okay, so do you see where these edge cases like this can be problematic?
I don't. I think this is all smoke and mirrors, because if we're really going to get down to it, and what you're complaining about is that it didn't say it came from the open source, and you're not clear how that happened because it came out of the model, there could be some sort of database lookup string match thing that goes through all of open source and says, does anything that the model outputted by chance match an existing open source thing out there? And if so, add a URL that says inspired by this URL or whatever. Like, that ought to be enough.
Yeah, with respect to the open source community, you're right that might be a solution with code to say, hey, this was inspired by.
Yeah. So make us jump through the hoop and run this thing that adds these references.
I mean, it's a fairly straightforward solution, but now is AI ML, are they built to actually understand where they reference something from?
Oh, the separate issue. I would just do this in a traditional 1980s software design fashion. Like, here's a database of documents, aka the original source code or all of open source or whatever. Here's some output of the model. Find any exact matches that come from open source, and where there's an exact match, add a credit. If you want me to start this afternoon writing that algorithm, I need to plan it a little more, but I don't think anyone would question I could come up with a solution that does that
I
with,
hear you.
very traditional algorithms.
Right, and that makes sense. You're right. So that's a fairly straightforward solution in that case. What about the case of art, which is wholly different? You
Yeah.
could say inspired by, but it looks completely different.
Every pixel is a different value.
So I did see this thing that said that, Lensa, Lensa,
Yes.
something new. I haven't even used it. I don't know much about it. All I know is They have an AI model, and you upload like 10 of pictures of yourself, and it trains that model to be able to draw you. And you can put yourself in different situations or looking like different characters. It seems to be working. It's pretty popular. Seems to be
Yeah.
working pretty good. I have seen people say that it is unethically sourced, right? I know.
Like they
So,
say about their vegetables.
right, exactly. So this is unethically sourced
Okay.
artwork, and that it's harming the art community. To which I would say, well, I don't know of a single artist in history, unless you lived in a white room your entire life, who isn't influenced by other people's artwork. Some artists indeed look like other artists when they
Of
draw.
course.
Digital artists copy stuff all the time and turn it into something new, and in layers and different art. They might take the arm from here and the torso from there, and in the end, it's unintelligible. You can't find the source of it, but it is derivative art that has been pulled together from different sources. And much like code, you could say, well, this was inspired by, but it's a lot riskier saying it's inspired by someone's art than it is inspired by open source code. Because in the open source community, we're happy to include, a license copy just because we appreciate that about the open source community. Whereas with art, you could say inspired by, and if it looks close to that, that's going to open the door for, some kind of lawsuit. Oh, you copied my art.
Yeah, maybe.
Now, I'm not saying I agree, but I'm saying it's like, where do you draw the line there? How different is the machine than a human in terms of being inspired by or programmed by all the art we've ever seen and been in touch with?
I don't know how you would measure that.
Exactly. I don't know how you'd measure that, but how different is the machine than a human, really, in terms of its training, right? Aren't we very similar in that case?
Well, you could spin that both ways. I would argue we're very different in that the machine is going through a singular loss function optimization, whereas human beings are a complex biological process.
So give me an example of what's what output, what would make the output different in those. I guess we on any given day could feel different.
Yeah, we evolve, we change our feelings, we learn new information, all this kind of stuff. And we think in a very abstract, symbolic way. Whereas these models like Stable Diffusion, it is trained to reproduce faithful images to text prompts.
Well, I saw this one thing where the guy said, "Show me a cat, CAT," and it
Yep.
drew some pictures of a cat, and then it said, "Show me a CAAT," and then a CAAAT. How many
Interesting.
A's did it take before it stopped becoming a cat?
Uh huh.
And they were different every single time. Like a human might draw a cat, but every time they're going to do something different. They're not going to reproduce the same thing, which
Right.
is what I know that's not emotionally based, but it depends on those starting, whatever the startup process is that generates the initial thumbnail, right?
The random seed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that random seed can dramatically influence, what the output is. I'm not making an analogy here. I'm just saying that um, in some ways it's behaving outwardly like a human would. You're not. It's not predictable as to what it's going to generate because of that initial random seed.
Right. I mean, we could make some empirical statements about it, like the reliability it will output an image that people agree has a cat in it when the prompt includes the word cat. That's you could do an experimental study of that. You wouldn't look at the underlying hyperparameters of the model, but you would trust that after 1,000 such examples, you know it's 99% or whatever.
In terms of data that was used to train the model when it comes to
Hmm.
artwork, I'm trying to find the argument for that it's unethical. I'm trying.
Yeah.
I
Well, I don't know that you'll find it. I have a rather radical view on this. I think music is the bellwether here. What happened with music? It used to be the case that it was expensive to get because you had to buy the medium. You had to acquire a physical object to consume music. as soon as it got online, that changed immediately, and so did the music industry and the way musicians make money and publish. Music is essentially free to listen to now, basically. It's given away, and those artists make money in different ways, those that survived. I think the same thing will absolutely become true now of visual art.
Well, sure, I do agree with that, but it doesn't answer the question.
Oh, yeah, so I guess,
Hold
yeah,
on.
fair enough. In that regard, the copying doesn't matter. Everything's a copy, the output is free. You can't sue anybody for anything.
I guess the argument for unethical means that if the art looks very close to what some other artist in the world has previously human generated, that means it was probably inspired by it and therefore it's
Sure.
unethical because humans are more important than machines,
Or
right?
that, nobody except Georgia O'Keeffe is allowed to draw orchids.
Right. What would be another argument is I mean, I guess really the crux of it is we're favoring machines over people. That's what they would argue. Like, why does the machine get to claim, this art style over me who's been doing this art style for 20 years? But that sounds very similar to the people who call other people sellouts or, say I was doing that before them, but they just made
Right.
it, they were just successful.
Or let's tell Apple they have to take all the string instruments out of GarageBand so that string musicians get more opportunities.
Oh, that's a really good one. Right, right. Oh, yeah. Perfect example because that is what it's like. I can't find an argument for it being unethical.
Yeah, I mean, there's a level to which, okay, so there are cases of plagiarism. Like if tomorrow I start like a company and I just make T-shirts and posters and it's all Disney characters and I don't even rename them, I'm pretty sure Disney's going to take me down, right? There's some sort of trademark, copyright, whatever. Let's just maintain all those same laws. It doesn't matter how the image came into existence. If we can say this is just a total ripoff, whatever that means in the eyes of the law, then we stop it versus an homage slash you changed it enough to be the generic, overseas version.
That's right. We all know that. I think you've read this comic that Hyperion is a ripoff of Superman,
Sure.
right? We know it, and it's just doesn't have the S on the chest for the most part. It's just a different part, like somewhat different story. It's a great story. I think it was Hyperion. It happens all the time in the comic book industry. I mean, there's an analog to just about every Marvel character in the DC universe.
Sure. And
Like,
every character is Batman or Superman in some respect.
right. I don't know how far we can push it. I
Archetypes.
I feel like it's just I'm sympathetic to the
Sure.
to the people who are going to lose their jobs over this or the people who haven't established a big enough name in art to be successful and feel like they still have opportunity and that this is going to take it away because I can see that people would feel that way like my chance at being a great artist is just gone because nobody's going to value art as much because they can just generate it now. You see what I mean?
Yeah, but like, what's the alternative? I mean, maybe you really like to write COBOL programs, but the world changed.
I agree. I'm just, you know,
Yeah.
trying to look at it from the other side and see how people approach it. I'm sympathetic to this rather profound change that's going to occur over the next 5 years for
Well,
artists.
here's a crappy thing that could happen. All future editions of Magic the Gathering use only AI generated art that's all trained on amateur artists who otherwise would have been hired by the people who make Magic the Gathering.
That's true. Or Dungeons and Dragons and all the role
Yeah,
playing games that are out there, they helped launch the careers of a lot of beginning artists.
sure. But
Um,
I mean, two things of that. One, there's potentially a social backlash, but I actually wouldn't even worry so much about that because, okay, it's a different game now. It's AI generated, but AI currently doesn't necessarily have the same uh, innovative criteria that human beings have. Like, I haven't played Magic in a long time, but I bet if I did, a lot of it has changed. Probably some for the better and probably some for the worse. AI doesn't know how to evolve that product, it just knows how to copy the way it's been done so far.
Got it. Okay. And I do think what you said is going to happen, that there will be companies that say, hey, you know what? This is all art done by humans. We've talked about this before. I think for sure there's going to be a badge, human badge, for a
Maybe.
particular company, without a doubt.
Same way
I
these
think
organic badges. So
I think we've also established that things like logos are farther off, but just generating art of a cat in a spacesuit is a pretty trivial thing at this point. And in another 2 years or year, maybe less, 6 months, it'll get hands and fingers right. I don't know if you've
yeah,
seen some of the horrible.
yeah, the hands are pretty painful looking.
It's pretty painful. And when that starts to occur, I mean, like, why not save yourself a ton of money and generate all your art from the prompt that you wrote for the book, and you don't need an artist anymore
Right.
because the
But
style of
you
some of them is
you are
amazing.
the artist.
Yeah,
You are also creating the visual art.
right. And that's fantastic from the perspective of someone who's not that great of an artist, but I write.
Yeah.
I love the idea of, I can take my kids and I can publish a book. They can write it and I can prompt engineer the right piece of art.
Sure.
And now we have a whole book.
And a new work that otherwise did not exist exists.
Right. It's empowering authors, that's for sure.
There will be top tier books that want to have a famous artist because it's going to be better.
That's right. That will be the human badge.
She'll pay extra for it.
That's right. So we'll end on a bright note.
Yeah.
There's definitely opens up a lot of other industries to do more creative things. And we can talk about the floodgate that opens of material and whether or not that's a good thing on another time.